Welcome, new barrister. Your first real trial is upon us. Get ready to have your wit tested. This is no easy whodunit murder trial, no. This is, as we say, a cold case. A very cold case. The writings of the Bible are on trial. Are they accurate accounts of actual historical events? Or are they merely fictional stories created as religious mythology? Scholars have debated the historicity of biblical texts for centuries, and you need to scrutinize all of the evidence they have uncovered to date to support your client. It looks as though you have been assigned to... Oh, lucky you! You get to select which side to represent. The prosecution will argue that there is little, if any, historicity in the Bible, while the defense will argue that biblical narrative is in large part an accurate record of historical events. Each side, both the prosecution and defenders of the biblical text, will present compelling evidence to support their respective claims. Choose your side, then put on your detective cap and see what clues you can uncover. Inspect them closely, and then use your deductive reasoning, as well as your fancy law school critical thinking skills, to determine which evidence supports your side, which refutes it, and which is irrelevant to the case altogether. As I have said before, I am the last and highest court of appeal in detection. Now, it's your turn. When you feel your case is ready for the courtroom, submit your evidence to the judge. Cheerio. Can archaeologists, with spade in hand, verify the biblical version of the conquest of the land of Canaan by the great ancient Israelite commander Joshua? Consider the fabled city of Jericho, whose walls reputedly came crashing, in fact, tumbling down. In 1930, a professor at England's Liverpool University, John Garstang, brought a team to British-controlled Palestine, hoping to shed new light on the ruins of a place called Tel El Sultan, or biblical Jericho. At Jericho, I found evidence of catastrophic destruction and burning, including a collapsed wall that I linked to Joshua's invasion. I dated the conquest to around 1400 BCE, perfectly in line with the traditional biblical chronology that places the Exodus in the mid-1400s. But Garstang's conclusions would not go unchallenged. Adding another layer of controversy was fellow British archaeologist Dame Kathleen Kenyon, who returned to Jericho in 1952. Among fragments of glass from broken Coca-Cola bottles, assorted Byzantine coins, and shards of pottery from the Herodian era, Kenyon identified the so-called Tower of Jericho, an 8.5 meter or 28-foot stone edifice from the pre-pottery Neolithic A period. Dating to around 8000 BCE, it is among the earliest stone structures known to exist in the world. Kenyon discovered the tower, built against the wall inside the ancient town during the excavations of 1952 to 1958. She also found a series of walls at Jericho, dating to the early and Middle Bronze Ages. But she dated none to the Late Bronze Age, when Joshua is presumed to have destroyed the city. The Middle Bronze Age wall would have existed a century and a half earlier than the traditional biblical chronology of the conquest by Joshua, and 3.5 centuries earlier than the revised chronology put forth by the Baltimore School. Kenyon's dating is still accepted by the majority of archaeologists. She commented, "The archaeological remains indicated that many of the cities said to have been conquered by Joshua were not in existence at the end of the Late Bronze Age, nor was there any major change in material culture. Were it not for the Old Testament, no invasion would have been suspected at this time. The clues were in the pots. Even the tiniest pottery fragments. Bear in mind, Mycenaean imports, pyxides, stirrup jars, and amphoriskoi became commonplace by late Bronze Age too, and were imitated by local potters from then on. It was the lack of such imports that Kathleen Kenyon based her conclusions on. Namely, Jericho was uninhabited at the time Joshua supposedly conquered it. Nevertheless, advocates of the Bible as genuine history weren't quite ready to give up. Archaeologist Bryant Wood, for example, noticed that Kenyon hadn't actually examined Canaanite pottery at the site. Instead, she based her conclusions on the absence of imported pottery that might have been expected in the late Bronze Age. Garstang's pottery, by contrast, did in fact check out to be from the late Bronze Age, dating precisely to 1400 BCE. There's some additional evidence we would do well to consider. Bear in mind, the previous excavations of Garstang and Kenyon had unearthed storage jars full of grain, evidence that the siege had occurred soon after the spring harvest. According to a detail in the biblical account, an inhabitant of the city named Rahab sheltered 2 Israelite spies on her roof under the flax, which was up there drying just after the harvest. It's telltale evidence that Joshua's invasion would indeed have taken place in the spring. Moreover, since the jars were full, it's clear that the siege was very short, consistent with the biblical account of just 7 days. As for the fallen walls, both Garstang and Kenyon noticed that the entire Jordan River Rift Valley is seismic and that earthquake activity is not uncommon. For his part, Bryant Wood observed that one area of the wall, which, unlike Kenyon, he dated to around 1400 BCE, had not collapsed. This is again consistent with the biblical record, indicating that the house of Rahab, literally built into the casement wall, was spared by the Israelites. Furthermore, the Bible records that after its conquest, the entire city was burned. While Kenyon dated the destruction 150 years earlier, she nonetheless pointed out the remains of the fire. This red and white streak is the remains of a tremendous fire so fierce that the 10-foot thick walls were burnt through and through. But just when the tide might be turning in favor of the biblical account, new data came in. The actual remains of the grain in the jars was carbon dated. The results? Not 1400 BCE, but indeed around 1550 BCE, just as Kenyon had asserted. There was, we should point out, an error factor of up to 110 years, but that still wouldn't be enough.
Nevertheless, carbon dating has been shown to be off before, and it just might come down to which science you trust, carbon-14 or archaeology. After thousands of years, it looks like the battle for Jericho isn't over yet.